will China block or cooperate on the UNSC move to designate Masood Azhar a global terrorist? A statement coming from China's Foreign Office is now asking for a resolution that is acceptable to all. Should that be code for another veto? Remember, China has blocked India's move 3 times in the past. There are also veteran security analysts like Brahma Chellaney who have argued that even if Masood Azhar is designated a global terrorist, it may not change the fundamentals. Let's go across to Brahma Chellaney now. Mr. Chellaney, this very peculiar statement coming from the Chinese Foreign Office talking about a solution that is acceptable to all. How should we read this? What is your sense? What will China do this time when there's enormous global pressure to designate Masood Azhar a global terrorist?
China does not like to be a loner. And this time, China stands completely isolated. And if it were to still veto this particular case of designating Azhar as a terrorist, it'll expose itself. It'll also damage its relationship with India. So one will have to wait and see as to whether they still will veto the proposed resolution that will come up later today.
You've made the argument that even if Azhar is designated a global terrorist, and if that happens and China does not block it, does not use its veto power, you've been arguing that that is not going to change the fundamentals either of Pakistan's patronage of terror groups or of China's sort of collusion in that process. So talk a little bit about that.
The issue is not Masood Azhar or Hafiz Saeed. The real issue is Pakistan's proxy war, which continues to breed terrorists. So even if you were to designate Masood Azhar as a terrorist under the UN category, that does not deal with the real issue. We've had the case of Hafiz Saeed, who was designated by the UN as a global terrorist more than a decade ago. And then subsequently, the Americans put a $10 million bounty on him. And yet, Hafiz Saeed is operating openly from Pakistan. I think the designation of a terrorist under the UN resolution is important if the victim country intends to carry out an assassination overtly or covertly. In the case of India, there's never been any intention to assassinate anybody in Pakistan.
Right.
So pursuing a Pyrrhic victory may actually detract from the main issue, which is finding a way to combat Pakistan's proxy war by terror. Some Western powers, including the United States, believe that if they can deliver on Azhar's blacklisting by the UN, that will help to satisfy the Indians and diffuse the present crisis on the subcontinent. So some Western powers are really pushing very hard to get Azhar designated as a global terrorist by the UN. But from an Indian standpoint, even if it's done, it'll be a good thing, symbolically important, but it will not address the key issue that India confronts, which is the state sponsorship of terror by Pakistan.
So you're saying, Mr. Chellaney, that it would be, if it happens, merely a symbolic statement, and it could be a global sort of plan to de-escalate military tensions between India and Pakistan and ensure that nothing happens beyond Balakot. That is your interpretation of why the United States, UK and France, and it seems by all accounts the Saudis too, are playing go-betweens in this process.
Well, I think Azhar's blacklisting by the UN is one obvious thing that the Western powers can deliver to India. So they're emphasizing that issue in the hope that that would help to de-escalate the present crisis. From the Pakistani standpoint, the fear of an Indian airstrike or a naval strike or even a ground strike remains. Most international overflights are still barred through Pakistani airspace. Even domestic flights in Pakistan are restricted to a narrow corridor along the borders with Iran and Afghanistan. So the Pakistani military generals are still fearful of a surprise Indian strike. And the Americans, because they're very eager to clinch a final deal with Afghan Taliban, with Pakistan's help, want very much to diffuse the present crisis on the subcontinent.
In the end, though, I must ask you, you are among those who have made the argument that we focus all our energies on our problem with Pakistan and underestimate, undercalculate actually our problem with China. And in some ways, if Pakistan were not literally quite almost like a colony of China, being bankrolled by it, being protected by it, it's literally like a Beijing protectorate, perhaps it would be easier for India to act. So how should India approach the China question? It's much more tricky than the Pakistan question in some ways.
In fact, your question provides the answer as to why India is in this present mess. This deepening China-Pakistan strategic nexus is bringing India's security under increasing pressure. And we all know about Pakistan's proxy war by terror against India. But how many Indians know about China's proxy war against India using Pakistan as a proxy? So for China, Pakistan is a proxy against India. And they have been building Pakistan as a counterweight to India, including transferring weapons of mass destruction technology to Pakistan. They're doing everything possible to box in India through Pakistan. This is the most cost-effective way for China to deal with India.
Well, Brahma, Chellaney, we'll wait in the next few hours. We will know how China actually behaves. But important point from you that sooner or later, India will have to address not just the Pakistan question, but the China question. And, even if India is able to gain that diplomatic victory at the UNSC, that is not going to solve the fundamentals of the problem, Pakistan's patronage of terror and China's protection of Pakistan. Pleasure to have you, sir, on the program tonight.